Hello again there, everybody, and welcome to another installment of my random series. I've entitled Recent Reading, which is obvious. It's about the stuff I've been reading. The last time around, and I don't remember how far back that's been, but I think I had mentioned how I had just got this book in, or I was getting it. Anyway, this is book number 4 in Stephen King's Dark Tower series, Wizard and Glass, it's called. And this is kind of getting its own special video because I just got done reading this a few days ago, and this is without a shadow of a doubt my favorite Stephen King book aside from The Stand. It's my favorite book so far in the series. And I have to admit, I was really shocked at how much I ended up liking this book, because as I was reading the first couple of books and I was reading about the series, because this has always been a very mystifying series to me, the Dark Tower series, especially because it's at this point right now it's 8 books long. Book number 1 written sometime in the late 70s or the early 80s. The most recent book just a couple years ago. It's been a long drawn out series. It's a very confusing series. It still confuses me to this point. It seems to be almost like the world that almost every other work of Stephen King's seems to revolve around, because there's people and characters from all sorts of books that intertwine through this series. But anyway, once I finally started to get into it, I literally got into it. I was so enraptured by this story of Roland and his group of people from our world, even though from different times, and then learning about the world in this universe. This whole story is confusing but enthralling all at the same time. And anyway, as I was saying a moment ago, I read that somewhere in the books in this series, I was going to come to a story where a good chunk of the book is spent on a story from Roland's past. And it's like, okay, Book 1 introduces us to Roland and the Jake character. Book 2 introduces us to the it's called the Drawing of the Three. It's these other characters pulled from our world, so to speak, into Roland's world. Book 3 really heavily details all of those characters traveling through this world. So you're so invested in what's going on in this story. And then Stephen King decides to throw this at you. He decides to take you back into Roland's past, which is interesting, but I dreaded it because I was like, I want to know what's happening to them right now. And then I read this, and you could have almost deleted all aspects of all the aspects of Roland and Eddie and Susan, or Susanna, I guess you should say, and Jake and Oy's travels. You could have deleted all that part of it and just had the story of Roland when he was younger. It would have made a perfectly fine book, even if you knew nothing about the Dark Tower series. In my opinion, it was that good. And in a way, I'm not wondering if by the time this is all said and done, as long as the Dark Tower series has some sort of an ending or a resolution, I could see this series being my favorite literature of all time. It'll still be pretty hard to knock The Stand off as my sole favorite book, but the Dark Tower is gunning for it, which is great because it just means that Stephen King really is the amazing author that I believe him to be, and a lot of other people do. But I don't know, I just spent probably 10 minutes before I started to record trying to find this line in the book, and I'm just going to read this small little passage here. This is Roland and the lady named Susan from his past. This when he was 14 and she was about 16, and they fell in love, and after, I guess it was after one of their little interludes, they're having a conversation, and he says, "Fare you well, Susan, I love you," and he starts to say you, but he stops. And it says, he paused, then smiled, "I love thee." This book is filled with these and thous and a lot of this language, which for me it's funny because it sounds very biblical, and in this it sounds just very well-to-do. But anyway, he says, "I love thee," and she says, "And I thee, Roland, what heart I have is yours." And I love that line, "What heart I have is yours." It's kind of something that I've thought a million times, when because of maybe your age and youth and inexperience, or perhaps because you've had a tough life, or you believe that you've had a tough life, and you underestimate yourself somewhat, and you say something like that. I'm fond of saying that all the time, what heart I have is yours. I don't know, it would just, that line struck a chord with me. I was falling in love with the Susan character. I was totally rooting for young Roland, the Roland that still had some emotion and some youth to him, before he became this crusty old gunslinger that you get to know in all the other books up to even the beginning of this one. So this is what I've read recently. This book here, almost 700 pages long. Let's see. Yeah, the story itself, 694 pages, and just amazing from start to finish. I'm looking at trying to get the next book in the series, but it'll probably be a week or two before I have it. So I'm throwing some other reading in there. I don't have the book to show because I took it to work today and I'm not done with it. But in one day I read more than half of this book. It's called Blockade Billy. It's another Stephen King book. It's a baseball-related story. And as far as the Blockade Billy part of the story is concerned, I was actually a little let down by it. It's done from the point of view of, like, if Stephen King was an interviewer and he went to interview this guy who was an older fella in a retirement home, nursing home or something, but who had played baseball years ago, and he told the story of this guy named Blockade Billy, and it has some baseball to it, but the main thing about it was kind of like the twist in the story. But unfortunately, and I don't want to spoil it, but in my opinion, where Stephen King exceeds all expectations is in books like this, fantasy worlds, horror worlds, unrealistic stuff that you still get swept up into. Blockade Billy's story is very realistic, and some might say that the horror is in the realism of what happens in this story. To me, maybe it's my desensitized nature of all the years of internet and everything else, but I was like, it's not scary because of the fact that it's real. I could pick up a newspaper or magazine and read the same thing. When I read Stephen King, I want to be blown out of my shoes. So I was a little let down because it wasn't that kind of a story, in my opinion. But it was still an interesting read. And then there's a second story in the book called Morality, I think it is, which, hopefully I'll get to read that tomorrow, and then I'll find another book to pick up until book number 5 comes along, which is called The Wolves of the Kala. I don't know, though. Man, this is going to be a hard one to top. But, hopefully the entire series continues to hold the momentum that has been built up to book number 4. So, any Stephen King fans out there, I may have mentioned that in previous videos. I think he's one of the most amazing authors of our time. And maybe he's just a little too popular so that some people are like, nah, I don't like that guy. But he's never let me down. Well, okay, Blockade Billy was maybe a little bit of a letdown, but I give him a pass. It was only 80 pages. It wasn't like I read a 700-page book just to feel like I got cheated in the end. So once I finish that one and probably the next book, I'll do another recent readings video. So until then, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.